Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's Hilda Gan, and we have got a really great show for you today. This is Talent Talks for small business owners, and I'm going to start sharing my slide. We want to start promptly at 1 o'clock today because we've got Tenesia Benjamin with us, and she has this very pragmatic, respectful approach to diversity. So I'm so looking forward to having her join us. So, welcome, and let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to Talent Talks for Small Business Owners. This is season 2 of our webinars. We've been helping business owners and HR professionals learn about some of the key topics that they need to think about as they're going through COVID-19. Today's episode 2 is creating an inclusive culture in a bless you. Bless you, bless you. Creating an inclusive culture in a diverse workplace. We are in for a real treat because in talking to Tenesia, we've had some really good talks, and I love her respectful, inclusive approach and very neutral. It's very opening. It's not targeted from a perspective of us versus them. It's a we concept. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. Next slide. So we started our webinar series really to answer that need, to help small business owners and entrepreneurs with HR expertise and strategies. So during COVID, we actually last year did 30 presentations on various aspects of COVID-19 as it relates to your staff and HR. If you like us, tag us at PeopleBright or at hashtag TTSB 2021. I'd like to acknowledge that East Gwillimbury Chamber of Commerce has been our sponsor since June of last year. They saw the topics that we were creating and the need that they can do to help business owners under the chamber and beyond. So I'd like to bring Lauren forward for a few words. Thank you, Lauren, for coming
Thank you,
today.
Hilda. Yeah, thank you, everybody. It's been great. Yes, as Hilda said, we've partnered with Hilda on these sessions for the last, I guess we're coming up close to a year now, little, not quite a year yet, but Hilda had some amazing topics throughout the year last year, and I found that there was such huge value to the business community in East Gwillimbury and across York Region. So we've been promoting this out into the communities because we feel that there is a need for the businesses to take advantage of the topics that Hilda has been sharing with us over the last year now. So we are so pleased to be able to partner again with Hilda, and I'm really excited and looking forward to this particular session because I think that this is an important one about inclusion and diversity in the workplace. So thank you, Tenesia, for being here and for helping with this session. And thank you again, Hilda and Jenny. So I'll pass it back over.
Thank you. So what we want to do today is, we'll share a little bit of introductions, Tanisha and myself, and then I'm going to ask Tanisha to speak on diversity and inclusion. During that conversation, she's going to call upon me to kind of give my perspective from time to time, particularly at the end, and then we want to open it up for Q&A. So Tanisha will remind you, but use the chat box, put in your questions, and we will get to them at the end. Ooh. And we're going to allocate 20 minutes for questions and answers because we really want you to take away a lot of conversation and practical tips and strategies today. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am Hilda Gan. I'm the founder and president of PeopleBright Consulting. We offer a full service HR consulting practice. I'm also creator of a concept called Connect with Rev Up, and I focus on helping leaders, business owners, managers. I help leaders with their people management skills, and we created a training program that really helps build the confidence of people as leaders. I'm very passionate about creating a healthy workplace. My husband and I, in a previous business, I'm a serial entrepreneur, co-founded a company called iTrans Consulting, based in the Richmond Hill and then Markham and then Richmond Hill area. 25 years of HR experience, and as I said, I am a serial entrepreneur. One of the things that we did when we were iTrans Consulting is we created that special place to work. And we were recognized by the best workplaces in Canada as one of the top 10 best workplaces twice. I am passionate about what I do. I love to help entrepreneurs. So I started a podcast in August of last year where I host the show called Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gan. And we feature the entrepreneur next door, where we really focus on the stories and the successes and challenges that they've had. So if you like learning through stories, check out Rev Up Your Potential podcast. I would now like to introduce Tenesia Benjamin. She has her degree, her master's, and her bachelor's. Her focus is on being a senior HR consultant where equity, diversion, and inclusion is one of her key things. She is so passionate about it. And she comes by that from her own experience. And I'll let her tell you more about that. But she is renowned worldly. She has worked in the Caribbean, North America, in East Africa, and she has a real strong passion about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And I love her approach because it is from a place of respect and a place I'll call neutrality. Rather than taking one approach and saying, you need to do this, this is what's happening, she really opens that dialogue, allows you to feel inclusive in helping us move forward in a world where we do all feel included. And we are diverse, so they can't change that, but we want people to be included. So I'm going to let Tenesia.
Hilda, your uh, microphone just stopped working, but this is still a good point for Tenesia to jump in and say hi to everyone.
Okay, there you are. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Hilda, and your team for extending this invitation. As you said, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge passion of mine for obvious reason. I'm a visible minority, but also it's one of those things where you want to make sure your company is as healthy an environment as possible. And so whatever work you can do towards and enabling that is it's a privilege, I find. So thank you again for that. And I want to thank the participants for joining as well. We have a really engaging discussion ahead of us, Eldon and myself. And I hope at the end of this, you can take away some practical tips to bring back to your workplace. And of course, feel free to put your questions in the chat. You'll be first in line to have those questions answered or concerns that you may have. So today as the topic we're talking about is creating an inclusive workplace with your diverse workplace. And the objectives that we'll be discussing today are inclusive workplace culture. What does it look like? What are the benefits? And we're also going to be looking at identifying, understanding challenges to inclusion in the workplace, common missteps when addressing diversity and inclusion. And we're going to be looking at some best practices. And when we talk about best practices, we're looking at allyship. That's one of my favorite words right now, because I really do believe that with allyship, we're able to push this inclusive initiative a bit faster and have it be a bit more productive. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today I won't be focusing too much on definition. I really do believe that for the most part, persons do have an understanding of the terms diversity, inclusion, and equity. But what I will do, I will briefly define them so as to eliminate any confusion that tends to happen with specifically diversity and inclusion. Sometimes persons tend to think they are interchangeably or they are one and the same, and they are not. And oftentimes I believe that's one of the reason employers are failing at their diversity and their inclusion initiative. Diversity is about numbers. It is about how many persons with differences do you have within your organization, whether they're visible minorities or non-visible minorities. So, and just a disclaimer, within this talk, unfortunately, we can't speak to every aspect of diversity, but we will try to touch on as many within our discussion. And from these examples that we provide, you can also use some of the best practices to tailor to your company. So inclusion is about, go back to the slide for me one more last time, please, sorry. So when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about belongingness. You know, inclusion is about a culture where employers feel valued, they feel safe, they feel comfortable, and are given opportunities, equal opportunities. And that's where equity comes into place. Equity is about respecting the rights of all of those who work with us, giving them fair access to all resources and opportunities, networks, and decision-making processes. Next slide, thank you. So when we talk about diversity inclusion, we look at diversity as a mix, and we look at inclusion as making the mix work. And Hilda, you know, I know you have seen, I believe, one of my previous presentation on diversity and inclusion, and this tends to be one of my favorite lines in my presentations. I overuse it, but it's such a unique way to help others understand that yes, you can have a diverse group of persons working in your organization, but unless you provide that space, those tools and those resources for those persons to work well together, it will not be a place where diversity, where differences are valued and where persons feel a sense of belonging. And research shows, NG Adler says, diverse businesses and teams outperform and out-innovate homogeneous teams. However, they can also be significantly less effective if we as employers do not offer those proper support, those safe space, those tools, those best practices to make sure these groups of people work well together. It's very hard for you to say, okay, take one person from here, another person from here, and put them in the room and say, go and work and be productive, be engaged. There has to be a safe space where you can facilitate that process. And that's where we come in as employers. And I really do believe that employers have a unique position to push forward the initiative for diversity and inclusion. Everyone has to work, or most persons, they work. And so we as organizations, as companies, as employers, as businesses, let us do our own part, our little part, in order to facilitate this process. And that's why our participants are here today. So we thank you for that again. And so when we look at inclusion, we look at some of the benefits for inclusion as well. So 2 times, or with an inclusive organization, when you have a diverse workforce that works well together, they're 2 times as likely to exceed in the financial target. So that's a benefit for your company. 3 times as likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be agile and innovative, be creative, 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcome. So why is it that companies are so afraid to be inclusive when you have the statistics, the research that shows that this is a plus for you? Well, that's a really important question. And there are many reasons, but I'll be focusing on 2. And 2 of those reasons are intent. If you don't have the intention, then you will not do it. Lack of commitment. And of course, as it relates to intent and lack of commitment and resistance, Hilda and I will be having a short discussion towards the end about this. And the second point that I want to focus on is lack of know-how. And that's where I come in right now. So I will be talking about, with lack of know-how, showing you some key aspects how you can create this inclusive workforce. From my research, one of the errors that we find that employers or leaders or managers tend to do is to allow their diverse workforce to occur naturally. And unfortunately, that can create errors. We need to define that culture. And what does that mean? Our work culture is the character and the personality of your organization. It is your values, it is your beliefs, it's your interactions, it's your behavior, and it's your attitudes. And all of these are influenced and informed by leadership. They're informed by your customers. They're informed by management. They're informed by practices, custom, policies, and peoples. So imagine all of these different people with all of their beliefs and all of their customs, and you're allowing them to define your workforce. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to become tense, and it can become a little bit hostile. So with you taking the reign and defining those values, defining that culture, then you are putting forward an expectation to employees as to how their behaviors are supposed to match those values and match those expectations. So how do we create know-how for the employers? First, we're going to look at what are those threats in your organization or in your company as it relates to inclusion? What are those common missteps, that employers tend to do or make? And provide you with some practical points to bring back to your workplace. Next slide, please. So we're going to be looking at the threats to diversity and to inclusion. And in this aspect, we're looking at common challenges to an inclusive workplace. So first, we look at systemic barriers or distrust. And when we looking at systemic barriers, we're looking at practices, policies, or procedures that result in some employees receiving unequal access or being excluded. And systemic barriers could be as simple as having a dress code. Sometimes we think having a dress code is a good thing, but we have to make sure that we don't exclude, isolate, or discriminate against persons with dress code. So for example, from time to time, I tend to wear my cultural head wrap. And I've had employers who said to me before that, asked me not to wear it because it doesn't fit in with the brand of their company, or that it could be intimidating, or it could be construed as something negative for their clients. And so clients will not want to work with me. That in itself can be a systemic barrier, because once you see someone coming with their cultural and their ethnic attire, innately you're saying, okay, well, I can't hire them. So because they can't, my clients won't work with them. It doesn't fall in line with their brand. And there's no research that actually supports that. So it's more of an opinion than anything else. So those things, those simple ways are things that you can use to address in your company without much cost. It's simply about re-examining your dress code and make it much more inclusive, much more creating a space where persons feel as though they can be their authentic self and not hide any part of themselves when they come to work. Other barriers includes like communication, language barrier, and prejudices and stereotypes, of course. And then we look at accommodation. It's important that we as employers be accommodating. And that includes tailoring your workplace to the specific needs of your diverse workplace. And I specifically stress tailoring because oftentimes we think it's a one-size-fits-all in an organization. And Hilda, I know, for example, you work with a lot of cultures. Culture is a big part of your brand. What's your experience, so to speak, with employers and accommodation, or systemic barriers, rather?
I want to say, referring back to the last example that you gave, can people hear me now? I think I fixed my mic. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I wanted to share that anecdote that you had, because if a person says, well, I can't have you wearing your native headdress, it says more about them and their values as a company. Maybe back in the 60s and the 50s, when the societal norm was a white culture, westernized culture in North America. But today, that kind of mentality is archaic. And if a company doesn't adopt a more inclusive, diverse work culture that's understanding and accommodating, then they're looked upon as a company perhaps that isn't worth having my business or me coming to work. So that argument about why should I not do it is not valid anymore. So what I find is people need to learn and be more inclusive. I think the word tolerate is inappropriate,
I
right?
do.
We will
I do.
tolerate this, right? Because tolerate means I'll put up with it. You know, I don't
Right.
believe in it, but yeah, I'll let you do it. But when you use that, shift that mentality and that word to inclusive, that allows you to embrace things. You know, that and one other point I want to make is in a previous slide you talked about mission, vision, and value system. And when you hire people, you want to hire people that align with your values. So it's important that companies do that, that they have a set of values that includes inclusivity and diversity and really breathes and lives it,
Right.
and not tolerate it, but make it a way of life.
Right. And it's, I'm very happy that you brought up that archaic point as well, because, and you know, I don't speak for all Black women, and it's important that we understand that even as a Black person, there are diversity within our race. And so, but one particular example that person's Black women encounter is even their hair. It's such a challenge for persons navigating the workplace. They feel they need to change their hairstyle to be more Eurocentric, to be accepted. So oftentimes you will not see a Black woman going to a workplace, going to an interview with their natural hair, because that would automatically disqualify them. And those are systemic barriers we were talking about, that can be, you can easily eliminate. You know, why do I need to, you know, straighten my hair? Why do I need to wear fake hair if I don't need to, if I don't want to, for me to be accepted for a job? And in some companies as well, like persons have to change their names to, you know, to get a particular, to get an interview, or to get a promotion. I remember sharing with you my experience with my last name. There are several reasons why I go by the name Benjamin, and the main reason was, before this career, I was in a male-dominated career, and they would not want to have a meeting with a woman. And so by having the name Benjamin and putting forward that name, and unfortunately or fortunately, the internet wasn't that big then, so they didn't have to go on Facebook or LinkedIn to see my face. So I got away with it. And so they thought they were actually having discussions through emails with a man. And so when we actually did meet in purpose, it was too late. And it's unfortunate that I had to use that strategy to be that deceptive, quote unquote, to get that opportunity. But those are the barriers that are out there for persons of minority, and those are the barriers that we can easily eliminate without any cost. So it goes back to intent, and it goes back to your commitment as an employer. All right, so can we go to the next point, please? And of course, we're talking about hostility. These are threats to inclusion as well. We're talking about bullying. We're talking about harassment, and we're talking about microaggression. And bullying is repeated or indirect or direct verbal, physical, or otherwise conduct. And you know, bullying could be isolation. So, for example, if I work in a predominantly white employee company, and everyone invites everyone else to lunch except for me, if that action is repeated, it could seem as microaggressive. It could come across as being a bully. You're excluding. So that is not fostering an inclusive environment. Extend an invitation, you know? And of course, we look at microaggression. There's so many, and overall, this has been one of the concerns that came out from the persons who registered for this discussion, this webinar, was, you know, to highlight a little bit about microaggression. So microaggression is indirect, it's subtle, or unintentional discrimination. And I would like to emphasize the word subtle, because a lot of times persons unintentionally make a comment, or, you know, or say something, and the intention is not for it to be offensive, but it does offend. And it's important for us to understand that it's not about your intention. At the end of the day, it's the fact that the person receiving the comment, it is derogatory, it's offensive. And so we need to create a space where we can say to them, you know, that is offensive without you becoming defensive or, you know, but allowing, creating a space where you can communicate or and be apologetic. You know, I'm sorry, I hurt your feelings or I was offensive. I did not know. And it opens up an opportunity for there to be some knowledge. Have you ever experienced microaggression, Hilda?
Well, I think it was more than microaggression, but it was innocent. I was a director of nursing at the time, and we had a meeting, and the actual president of the company came into a company. See, I have to switch gears. I'm back in healthcare. The president of the hospital said something, and then she realized what she had said, and I missed it, sort of. She said, "Oh, you know, no ticky, no washi." And I'm going,
Oh,
"What?" And I'd never heard that term before, but it harkens back to the days when some Chinese people would own a laundry, and they'd say, if you don't have a ticket, you can't get your wash, right? So no tiki, no washi. And then she just went red because she realized there was a Chinese person in the room, and she went like this, and because I'd never heard it in my life, I went like, what? Oh, she just insulted us, right? So sometimes people don't recognize that they're making microaggressions, and I think I like your tip, Tanisha, where it's about not that you know you didn't mean to hurt them, but now that you do, you just apologize. It's not like you were intentional, but I think it's keeping that dialogue open, keeping, you know, being in a place where you're comfortable apologizing, and then, as you say, opening the door to conversation. I used to, you know, I have this saying, rev up. You know, and rev up is treating people with respect, looking at them as equals, so equality. I know you like the word equity, but I treat equality like equity, valued, uniqueness, and potential. And I think when you look at people, we used to say, okay, treat people the way they want to be respected. But now that we're much more open and cognizant about diversity and inclusion, it is treat people the way they want to be respected. So one size doesn't fit all. Just because you think you're in their shoes, it may not be in their shoes. So what you're saying needs to be thoughtful of them. So when you do have a microaggression, then you need to say, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that, but thank you for pointing it out to me. Because there's expressions that we use that I watch from Bugs Bunny, and then I said, well, what kind of expression is that? Oh, I get it now, but I didn't know that it was a demeaning thing.
yeah. And it's important that I'm so happy you brought that up because sometimes even when you're at the workplace, you'll hear an employee says, you know, oh, I'm so ADD, and they don't live with that experience, but they're using that in a way that could become microaggressive. And oftentimes people say that, and they're not realizing that they could actually be talking to or about someone who actually does live with that disability. And so we have to be very careful of it. And, you know, some typical example of microaggression, just to give our participants some awareness of it. Um, when you know a white person will come to, you know, a minority person like myself, or Hilda, and say, "Well, your English is so good," and I'm thinking to myself, they're like, "Oh, yes, it is. We do speak English in our country. You know, I actually was born here too, so yeah, so my English is good." So by saying if the person's English is good, you're initially excluding or giving that impression that they're not from here, um, or that, you know, they had to must have worked quite hard to get to that level of where you had to give them that compliment. Or often I get this comment, "You are such a credit to your race," and whereas that may come off as somewhat of a compliment, it's it's somewhat demeaning. You know, we can be lot more. We can have a lot more value. We could have a lot more advantages. Everyone has that ability to be good. Everyone has the ability to be great and a great employee. So those I call them backhanded compliments. They don't resonate. They are microaggressive. Um, and there was this one that came across when I was doing some research as well, where it was said a person of color be followed around in a company, and, you know, in a business, and for example, in retail stores and so forth. And the sad part about that, the employer had a black person follow black persons around in that company while they were shopping. And I could just imagine how demeaning that must have been for the employee. Because one, now I realize where my employer's position is. He does not, how that is interpreted. One, he believes that black persons are criminal. Two, he believes that they're dishonest. They can't just knowingly walk around. And this action was just directly towards black persons. So it's not like we're taking it out of context right here. So it's important that we as leaders to recognize what our actions are and try to correct them as to make sure we foster that inclusive environment. Okay, next slide, please.
I just want to make a comment. Greg sent here, I think this is in response to what Jenny reinforced, that treat people the way they want to be respected. And Greg said, I think this is somewhat unrealistic as personal tolerances are so different. It should be more about what a respectful and tolerant society would say is respectful. I have my thoughts on it. Tenesia, if you want to say something first.
I'm sorry, go ahead with, could you repeat that for me? Sorry.
So the person said, I think that treating people the way they want to be respected is somewhat unrealistic. It's more about what a respectful and tolerant society would say is respectful.
Well, it seems onerous, but it's quite not. Treating persons with dignity and humanity and kindness is not it's a minimum, and that is what persons are asking for as it relates to the workplace. If you're treating everyone on the same level in terms of human decency, being kind and courteous, um, eliminating insults, eliminating these microaggressive behavior, that is in essence what we're talking about right here. It doesn't have to be something that is completely individualized. When you're able to treat everyone fairly, that is treating persons the way they want to be treated. I want to be treated fairly in an organization. I don't want to be given a different barrier to reach and someone else's get another one. So treating me fairly is about treating me the way I want to be treated, like Hilda would like to be treated. So I think sometimes we think about it too complex, or we think it's quite onerous. But if we were to break it down very simply, how would you like to be treated as an employee? If you're the employer, how would you like to be treated? Would you like to have equal access to promotions, to raise, to to appraisals? Would you like to have to be treated fairly, to be included into into the business meetings? Um, those are the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And if I can just add quickly, because I know we've only got 10 minutes left before we want to open it up to discussions. When I talk about respect at that this is more of a one-to-one level. You build a trusting relationship with somebody, and so when they feel that they want to be treated a certain way, that you respect that, and now that you try your best to do that. So it's not walking on eggshells thinking, well, how do they want to be treated, how do they want to be treated. It's that dialogue, it's building trust so that that you're respectful of their differences and their uniqueness. And when you know that, then trying to be respectful that way. So hopefully that talks about the practical realism of what I was saying, and not that you got to be on eggshells and treat everybody and wonder how they want to be treated. Okay, so we do have 10 minutes, so I want to keep us moving so that we do have time for your questions and that dialogue. And Greg, if you want to talk later, we'll bring you forward.
Okay, so we're looking at some common missteps when dealing with bias at the workplace. And, this good that this jumps right off of what Hilda just said, which is, walking on eggshell. A lot of times persons believe that they have to keep quiet or keep silent about what is happening, or their comments, or their, or if a microaggression happens within the company, they can't speak to it. So these missteps, they're very common within the workplace as it relates to preventing an inclusive workplace. So if you see someone is being offensive or has been offended, you don't have to stay quiet. You can pull the person aside and say, you know, I do believe that that action or that behavior was offensive. And as we said, it's about communication, open up that safe space. Um, Try not to become too overly defensive. Oftentimes, leaders must resist such reactions because they do not allow for constructive engagement. Remember, we said before that, you know, it's the intention, it's not necessarily your intention, but it's how the information is being received. Um, so comments on systemic inequities are not a personal attack, and it's important that we understand that. And overgeneralizing, so try not to overgeneralize individuals of the same race, gender, or identity. As I said before, I'm a Black woman, but I don't speak for all Black people. There are intersectionalities within our race, and it's important that you see your employees for who they are and who they are individuals. Um, in common missteps, implicit bias workshops and trainings. What I find often is that employers they create these trainings and workshops for their employees, but they do not attend. And it's important that you be a part of the solution. By not attending, inadvertently you're communicating that, well, I don't need this. But by attending that meeting, you're setting that example and letting your employees know that yes, I too need this information. We are all going to work on this together. And I call this internal responsibility, where the employer, the supervisor, and the employee, they all work together to make sure the work culture is very much inclusive and healthy. Next slide, next, please. And source of information. Where do you get your source of information? Oftentimes, you know, persons tend to get source of information from social media. That is not a very reliable source. And so we want to encourage persons to move away from this, you know, get a book. And of course, we can, when we do share the slides with you, we will be providing some tips and where to look for some good information where you can get more context as it relates to inclusion in your workplace. And don't be disingenuous. You know, oftentimes you hear companies say they're going to hire persons from diverse background, and it becomes an issue of tokenism where you're just showing the person, oh, we have a minority on site, but you do not provide an inclusive workplace for them. You do not provide the opportunities for them to grow and to be and to be successful. Next slide, please. Oh, are we? That's the last slide?
No, that's a couple more. So this is sort of where I share that concept, which I did talk about.
Right.
So it is, just to reiterate, this is inclusive. This helps create a framework for inclusivity. If you treat people with respect, look at them as equals, value them for who they are, look at the uniqueness that each of us has. So not stereotyping, but know that we have many sides to each of us. And then look at how you can tap into that potential. Potential meaning creating a trusting relationship, creating a professional challenge for them to rise and develop, and giving them opportunities to be in roles that they would like to attain similar to others. That's about inclusion, and that's the concept that I've created called Connect with Rev Up. So next slide.
Okay. So we want to look at some practical ways and give you some practical tools or tips to bring back to your workplace. And so these I consider to be best practices, but I like to use the word allyship. And what that means is when people are aware that aspects of their identities hold more power and influence than aspects of others' identities. And they use that advantage to advocate for people in lesser positions. And it's important that all of us, we do have our own privileges. Even I, as a visible minority, I have some privilege that I can use to advocate for persons who are less advantaged. So we all need to be allies. And so learn about inequity. One way to do is learn about inequity, and that includes being educated getting books, getting resources. This is one way you could do this. So there are free webinars, there are webinars where you pay, there are podcasts where you can have access to this information. So educate yourself. Please do not rely on minorities to educate you. It's important that you do not put that burden on them. You're allowing them to relive that trauma, and it's putting them in a position where it can trigger something that is unhealthy. Support systemic change. And how do we support systemic change? You use inclusive language. And this is very easy. So for example, if you're sending an invitation out to for a company dinner, instead of saying bring your husband or wife, you could say bring your partner. So this opens up and the opportunity for persons who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community to feel as though, oh, I can bring my partner, and it's a safe space. Standardized recruitment and promotion and appraisal processes. So have a standard set of questions when you are recruiting. It eliminates biases, because we don't want to hire persons, we don't want our biases to come with us within the interview process or within the promotion process. Lift others up by advocating. Call out inappropriate behavior. And sometimes this will come over time, but eventually, if we see something wrong happening or offensive happening, just a mere talk to can actually help. Believe underrepresented people's experiences and provide safe space for them to talk. Realize impact of microaggression and rolling out unconscious bias training regularly. And I say regularly because oftentimes employers believe that one training will do. This is a culture, and the culture requires for you to have constant change, and it has to do with repetition. So every couple of months, so if you one day out of the month, do something that facilitates this process. It could be as simple as having a potluck. Well, not right now because of COVID, but a potluck. Everyone is, their barriers are down when it comes on to food. Have a potluck where everyone brings out their ethnic foods, and you're like, oh, what is this? And so it creates a safe space where you can find out more about the person and see what you have in common with them. These are things that would help them feel belonged and engaged. And share growth opportunities with others. Advocate for those persons. Oh, I really do think Hilda will fit this position. What do you think? And make sure you have all the facts that support your recommendation, that supports that that push for Hilda to get a promotion. Recognizing privilege and use it to amplify underrepresented voices. And most importantly, listen. Actively listen, support, self-reflect, and change. And one way you could listen is by doing appraisal. And this could be anonymous. So you send a survey out to your staff and have them say to you what they would like an inclusive workplace to look at. And then you can tailor it according to how those responses are. Hilda, would you like to add anything to that?
Just briefly, because I really do want to get to have an open dialogue with people. I think there's two things here, and I see that through the comments. Some of it is there are changes you need to do as a company, the systemic changes, and then there are things that you can do as an individual. So when some of the comments say, well, you can't, it's unrealistic to do it at the individual level for everything. Of course, it makes sense. You have a system. You want that system to not be just a policy and procedure on a bookshelf, but you want to be a living, breathing document. So having things like, regular opportunities to talk about microaggression and roll out bias training. It's not a one-shot deal. The more you make it a part of the fabric of day-to-day living, the more it becomes easier to build trust, to talk about it openly, so that it's not only talked about when something's happened negative, but it's just part of the culture, learning about each other's. I know we have our next slide, which is the conclusion. Do we want to briefly do that, or do we want to open up for questions and use this as your summation, Tenesia?
Yes, so let's open up for discussion. Yes, I like that idea.
Okay, I like that idea too. Okay, well, thank you very much. Jenny, who has been here kind of being our production manager, if you want to come forward, fine. If you want us to answer your chat questions, fine. If you want to keep it private, send an email directly to Jenny and she will deal with that. So can I get you to help us moderate this section, Jenny?
Absolutely. Yeah, and similar to what Hilda has said, if you have any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat box. You can unmute yourself. You're very welcome to do so. Otherwise, if you want a personal private chat, like anonymous one, then feel free to send me a chat message, not email, in the chat box in Zoom here. But first of all, we can maybe talk about the current comments we already have in the chat box. So we did talk about Greg's comment about like, yeah, you can't respect the way they want to be treated. But at the same time, we also have Kiara and Lulu also comment on it, right? Kiara mentioned that it's not unrealistic, but it does take effort, and that's why we are here today. Very well said, Kiara. And I'm going to go through Lulu's as well. 100% personalization does not sound realistic, but I think Tenesia answered that that's not what we are talking about. Inclusion must start with ensuring workplaces actively anti-racist first. And or Tenesia, if you want to comment or chat about that, feel free to do so.
Yeah, so and these are all valid points, and I'm very happy that we had that question, that concern, and that question that we can address this on the individual level. But what we and as I said before, what we could do, we could create systems and practices and policies in place where we create a level playing field, we create equity, we create fairness for everyone to thrive. The objective for your employees coming to work is to be productive, and if they're not engaged, if don't feel safe and confident to do that, that productivity is going to decline. So by putting forward those fair policies, it creates a way where you can, one, address individuals on an individual level and also collectively, because it fosters a level playing field, fosters fairness. So yeah.
Greg looks like he's unmuted. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you, Greg.
I guess where I'm coming from is that in my experience, you have so many different tolerance levels that to adjust to personal tolerances leaves us open for situations that are definitively outside of what we're trying to achieve here. And an example I can give from my past is where someone is very clearly in a minority. I won't get into which minority it is, but consistently makes fun of that minority from the perspective that, well, I am of that minority, so I can make fun of it. And again, it goes against everything that we are trying to achieve by, sitting in on sessions like this, but having the discussion more importantly. Yeah. So that's where I'm coming from, is that it's not about personal tolerances or the way I want to be respected / treated. Some people just, they're not there yet. And that's my fear, is that if that's kind of the mantra, if that's the perspective that I'm going to respect you the way you want to be respected, we're leaving far too much on the table, that we're better than that. And that, my response to when I see situations like that is that, that's just, it's not acceptable. It's not good enough. And, no different than if someone else that you didn't like was to make a statement like that, I can't allow you to make that statement. It's inappropriate.
And since I made that statement, I will I'll make a first comment. I totally agree with you, and that is actually that is not acceptable. I mean, that is not showing respect. That person is definitely not showing respect. So not that you have to walk on eggshells and say, oh, yeah, that's your way, so I respect that. No, you do not respect that. What you need to do is take that person aside and say, this, as you said, Greg, undermines our policy. You think you have the right to make fun of your own race. But what you have done is you've actually been disrespectful to some other people of your race that are not that. So I need you to stop doing that, because that's not appropriate in what we're trying to do to promote it. So I wasn't promoting the fact that if somebody says this is the way I do it, we support that. No, it has to be within that idea of diversity and equity and inclusion. So thank you for bringing that to the attention, because I want everybody to hear that, because sometimes we think, oh, we got to accommodate for this, we got to do this, and then you bend over backwards when the person has actually not been appropriate in their behavior, and that's a disciplinary conversation.
Yes, and I agree with that, Hilda. So, Greg, to your point, and this is one of the reasons I said, Greg, before, that we need to employers need to define their culture. Um, and in this regard, where someone of the same race or a minority group believe that they could use derogatory comments or behave a certain way because they are within that group, that's not a standard set for your company, then it needs to be addressed. And it needs to be, and it's important that when you're having that conversation, you also explain to the person that they're actually engaging in stereotyping. So you're part of the problem, and so if you want to be a part of the solution, you have to, regardless if you're part of that race or that group, you have to be engaged in facilitating the process. And that's why I say inclusion in workplace inclusion is an internal responsibility. It is the employer, the supervisor, and the employee. Everyone needs to play a part in facilitating this culture. And so, if even if I say something derogatory to someone from my race, as an employer, as a supervisor, you have your value system in place. There should be a talk with me. And this is where I always tell people progressive discipline comes into place. I'm a big, when it comes on to diversity and inclusion and discipline, I'm depending on the nature of the act, I'm not a zero sum person. I think because we're in a place where we're allowing a room for growth, we need to create an opportunity for persons who do make errors to change. And so by you, Greg, now going as a supervisor, as an employer, pulling this individual aside and letting them know, talking to them about what their action is and how it does not fit within the value system of your organization or your company, then you're on the right path to showing people that, listen, regardless of who you are, when you do not adhere to the value system, when you are not promoting an inclusive environment, you will be disciplined, whether it be a written, a verbal, and it all depends on the nature of that act.
Jenny was asking if people would show themselves if we're having a discussion. So we'll leave you to that. Anybody else want to comment or come forward? So maybe we should go back to the conclusion slide then.
I think certainly there's one question, maybe in some people's minds, is how do you deal with senior leadership when they are not for that inclusive culture, right? What if they are resistant, maybe against it even, in creating that inclusivity and diversity?
Yeah. And for me, there's several things. That's a very big challenge, for particularly when it comes into senior management, because oftentimes they're the persons in charge. When it comes into resistance, I always start with including everyone from the get-go. So having everyone be a part of the initiative from the start, have them have a say. Sometimes a person's resistance can come from a place of not understanding. And so that includes you now, the daunting task for you to bring some awareness for that person. Um, and realistically, you are going to have persons who will never be a part of that. of that change. And it's important for us as companies to understand that sometimes there's going to be a tough decision where if you have a person or persons within your organization that is not compliant with, the ESA or that is partake in bullying, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which also comes on to and discrimination. Um, we have to make the hard decision of letting them go. A lot of times, as companies, we hold on to uh, employees who do not want to grow, who are poisoning, who are becoming toxic to our environment, and it creates more problem than actually solution. And so sometimes there is that hard decision where we come to a place where that is the final say, um, and it's a step that some companies will have to take.
Cool. Jenny, I think you want to go to the next slides.
Yeah, so because of the time restraint, we are 5 minutes until we end. So we're going to quickly jump into how you can reach Hilda and how you can reach Tenesia. And then if we have more time after, we will be staying after maybe 10, 15 minutes to answer any questions or comments we want to chat about.
I was so looking forward to this discussion, and I'm glad that people came forward through the chat and through our discussion, because this is a really important topic, and it starts from the top. They have to believe in it and they have to make it happen, and it's got to be a living, breathing document. I really want to thank Tenesia for coming forward today and sharing her insights in the way that she does it. And I think that was the real treat, not just hearing from somebody who had a particular view. I think her view is very open-minded. So we certainly can help you here at People Bright. We offer a free 30-minute discovery call. So if you want to talk to us about your HR challenges or diversity, welcome to do that. And that's the information. You'll get a copy of the slides. And then Tenesia also has opportunities for you to connect with her. Her email address and her LinkedIn is here as well. So I think we do have some upcoming talks. As I said, we do talent talks for small businesses. Our episode 3 is focusing on employee experience because that's the new buzzword. We really need to think about how we help the employee experience their work and why it's critical now. Like people might say, why should I bother? So I have some guests, HR recruiter, a lawyer, Malik, who happens to be on today. She's going to talk about healthcare and wellness, and another HR expert colleague of mine, Helen Patterson. So that's on May the 12th at 1 to 2:30. And then on the June 16th will be our next one. It's how to build high performance teams, really helping you think about what the new best practices are in helping people go forward. We can go back to the conclusion slide and let Tenesia share her final comments here.
First of all, I would like to thank East Gwillimbury Chamber of Commerce as well as Tenesia today for joining us today. It's a really great honor to have you, Tenesia, and a really great partnership with East Gwillimbury as always. So without further ado, we will maybe ask Lauren to come and chat for a few words, and then we'll jump right back to the conclusion.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for a fantastic session, Tenesia. You really provided so much information there that was really impactful, I felt, and we can talk a little bit more afterwards maybe, but thank you very much for the presentation. And Hilda, as always, fantastic presentation, and thank you guys for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so without further ado, we're going back. There you go. Keep chatting.
Okay, so the conclusion. So I want one of the takeaways I want for everyone leaving or on our webinar to have is that inclusion initiatives, they take time, and we have to be patient. I think a lot of times we expect things to go happen straight away. With culture, when you're changing culture, you're trying to change perspectives, you're trying to change behaviors, and you're trying to change beliefs. Persons have had these beliefs for sometimes most of their lives. So we need to understand this and we need to be very patient. And that's one of the reasons I always say it has to be repetitive. Repetitiveness helps to change that perception, change that behavior, and consistency. So, like Greg, the question Greg asked, or the question Greg gave, the comment Greg gave, if you see one person doing it, you correct that person, and another person, you correct that person, and that creates the consistency. That creates a trend, and person will fall in line and be like, well, yes, this is the value system that our company adheres to, and it is quite obvious if we don't adhere to it, Greg is going to give us a talking to. So we don't want to get a talking to. So it's important that we maintain that consistency and, and that commitment and that drive towards it. So an inclusive culture will ensure that all employees of all background, genders, ethnicity, sexuality are aware of their importance to the organization. It allows them to work with leaders of their company rather than feeling they are simply working for them. So build that relationship, build that, facilitate that process. Inclusive excellence. When we talk about inclusive excellence, we're talking about access to opportunities, equal access to opportunities. We're talking about equitable systems of recognition and reward. You know, am I going to be recognized for the work I do, or will someone else take credit for my work because I'm a minority? It's important that we look at those things as well. Talent differentiation and leveraging of differences. And I implore on everyone here, whenever you're doing these things, include your employees. Oftentimes we try to make policies and practices and we exclude them. LinkedIn did a research a couple years ago, and they said when they look at how employers saw their workplace in terms of inclusion, they had a higher percentage of how they believe their workplace was inclusive. Employees had a totally different opinion of it. So make sure you include them into this equation so that you can tailor it as best as you can to suit your specific organization. And every company initiative is going to be different. It's not a one size fit all. Okay, and that's my last words.
So let's open it up. Are there any last questions? Tenesia and I are planning to stay on for people if they have a few more questions. But thank you for coming, and we hope that you learned some tips and strategies to help you in your personal journey and your business journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you guys for coming.